We're going to welcome our next presenter, whose work I have admired from afar for some time, so I'm excited to see her in the room today. She has made me chuckle many a time as I've listened to her commentary on radio. And, you know, we just got to hear from Amy Lee Sagami about the importance of third floor grandmother, one woman's perspective on life and how she herself was able to develop as an artist and as a woman. And I think from our next presenter, we will get a slightly different perspective on that. Hollis Gillespie is a prolific author, and although she is on her third book right now, which is my trailer trashed, my dubious attempts at upward mobility. She has two previous books, which I have to chuckle and tell you that when I was going over this last night, my 8-year-old forbade me to tell you the titles of the two previous books. She's a bit of a prude. And since she's home from school already and probably watching this on the internet, I'm going to simply tell you that we're welcoming author, stand-up comic, and social commentator Hollis Gillespie to join us. Come on up, Hollis.
You know, my life has totally been changed since I arrived here today, so I've completely forgotten what I was going to say. So I'm just going to wing it. No. You know, actually, basically, what I'd like to ask you as the audience to do for a second is kind of humor me, because my point is, what if there was no such thing as plane travel? And I know that sounds simple and pedantic, but I want you to consider that for a second, because to me, I used to be a flight attendant. You may know me as the world-famous, freakishly rich, successful author. It wouldn't be true, but you may know me as that. But I used to be a flight attendant, and that's where I was terrified to fly. I was the worst flight attendant in the world. I'd sit there. I was not the bitch in the aisle that was being mean to you. I was the bitch in the back that was ignoring you because I was afraid to fly. And the whole time I was on the jump seat, I was writing, I was scribbling frantically, because fear was a big catalyst for me creatively, and that's where I wrote my books. But one of the things that I saw happening as I was flying was, because I started flying in 1989. This picture back here, I think that was taken in the early 70s. And I call that, I have a blog, it's called jethag.com, and it's just something I love. It's all in everything inappropriate that's going on in the airline industry, and something that's really inappropriate are, the uniforms they used to make the flight attendants wear. I mean, that's fun, if you ask me, and they totally look like they're waiting for an orgy. But I want you to consider this cabin. I mean, look at the seats in that cabin. That doesn't appear to me to be a first-class cabin. That appears to me to be a coach cabin. Those seats, flying used to be fun. It used to be part of the journey. It used to take a lot longer to get to Europe than it does now. Now you can get to England from Atlanta in 5 hours. And some people think that's wonderful, but I think that there's been a disconnect along the way between going to a place and just getting there. And one of the things that I saw with these passengers on the plane was the second they would get on the plane, I'm such a tech-tard. But how many pictures do I have of this on here? Ooh, Doris Day, kinda. What of? I'm totally, this I call the crotch shot. PSA was always so guilty of their ads in the 70s, because they made their stewardesses wear, these short mini skirts and with the hot pants, and then they'd get them all to advertise. And usually there's like in the advertisings from the early 70s, the plane is shooting right up the girl's skirt. It's like a little PSA plane, and the caption would read, "PSA gives you a lift," And so I love that. I think that's when I started. I had to wear a friggin' tie and a suit. I was like, "Where's the fun go?" And it started to get really business, business oriented when I began flying in 1987. There's a lot of safety regulations that they teach us every year. We have to go through jet recurrent. And they teach us these safety regulations because they change every year. Because every year some plane crashes and they figure out, based on the people that died in that plane, it is a living experiment, air travel is. They figure out that based on the behavior of the people on the plane, what they need to do next time the plane crashes. So we have what they call crash commands. And when people would, the flight attendants, they were supposed to sit at the front of the plane, and whenever the plane was going down, we would have to scream at the passengers, release your seatbelts, get up and get out, because they had been so desensitized from their environment, because I believe that airplane travel desensitizes you. It promulgates a desensitized environment, because if you knew where you were, you'd be in a complete panic the entire flight. You are in a metal tube that's been shot into the sky 3 miles high. And sorry, I don't mean to panic you, but this was my, I couldn't subtract myself from that perception. That's why I was always afraid to fly. But I always, I did as best as I could. The other flight attendants allowed me to live among them, even though I would panic the passengers. I'd be like, yeah, I smell smoke. It's electrical, I know it's electrical. And I was, they always made sure that I would take off, in a jump seat that was facing away from the passengers, so I wouldn't panic them. But the thing is that I would notice that people would get on the plane and immediately they'd put on their eye masks and their headphones, and they'd immediately try to just create as closely as they could their own sensory deprivation cocoon to just get through the trip, to just get through it. That's just what they were, that seemed to be, the journey seemed to be completely subtracted from the traveling. And it's gotten to the point where today I think people don't journey to where they're going. They just land there. And I think that the journey is so important, because I remember there was one flight attendant I used to work with who she would always say, when people were complaining to her, she would always say, well, beats traveling by covered wagon. And I'm thinking, well, covered wagon sounds great to me, and it sounds like a lot of fun. But the reason I'm saying this is because when you have to travel along the earth to get to a destination, like Evelyn Waugh in the 20s, one of my favorite authors, he was a war correspondent in the 20s. He traveled to the Horn of Africa by any means possible, and the only means possible he had was along the earth. Elephant back, horseback, train, rickshaw. He had to take only what was necessary, and if he had any preconceptions that he started out with, he had to shed them along the way, because they took up valuable space, and that space was needed to understand his surroundings in order for him to navigate them. So because he was able to divest these preconceptions, he arrived where he was going already acclimated culturally, already accepting of the people that he was encountering there. I love this. And then he was able to write about them in an enriching way so that we would read and be able to understand them. Today, that journey's been subtracted. And the reason I'm asking you to humor me is because earlier Mike McQuay came up here and he said, well, you don't need, you can use your Hummer to go on the long distance, go up and see your aunt for Thanksgiving, but you have the little electrical car that you can do on your normal journeys every day. I understand that plane travel needs to be, exist for transplanting kidneys and stuff like that, but I mean, and that's, yay for kidneys. But I just ask, I ask people to consider the journey. This totally looks like, I think that's sexual. Totally, it looks like a sex toy to me. The triangle head stews. And there we are again. And actually, air travel used to be a lot more fun. The plane used to be a bigger experience. The seats were bigger. Now, we've got this man is sitting on the armrest He's not even sitting in the seat, but he's actually he's having to straddle the armrest. Now, granted, he's a giant, but another thing is that a standard airline seat is only 17.2 inches wide. You know what's wider than 17.2 inches? A baby stroller. And when they're asking us to go on these long, long flights that are sometimes 20 hours long in a seat that is not as wide as a baby stroller. So the way to endure a trip like this in a cabin like that, which everybody does, is to desensitize yourself from what's happening. You have to cling to all your things. You have to go through security. You've got to tunnel into the plane through a jetway. You never see really the exterior of the aircraft or what's going on. Then you're in this area. You desensitize yourself with all of your, travel accoutrements, and you open your eyes later, and you're in an entirely different part of the hemisphere, and you have all of your crap that you started out with still with you. And I think that the journey is the journey, like I said, has been subtracted. So you land in these, or we land in these whole other wonderful parts of the world with all of our crap and our asshole-edness still with us, instead of having been divested along the way as it should have. So I'm not professing that we should abolish plane travel, but I do think that as a people, we would probably be better people if we just partook in journeys instead of just landing in countries, and instead of having to endure something like this, and being told by the airlines that, oh, well, it's the guy's fault, that he's so big, as opposed to the airplane's fault for not having seats that are wider than baby strollers. And, getting back to the crash command, one of the crash commands that they gave us, that they taught us, is, and this is a new crash command. They do not instill anything new to you unless it's been shown that it's necessary. So the new crash command, the last year I was flying for at an airline as a flight attendant, a jet recurrent, they taught us the new crash command, and it was leave everything. Evidently, it had become apparent that this was necessary to yell to people on planes as the plane, was crashing, when they were trying to escape the plane. During an evacuation, people were stopping to gather their carry-on baggage, because they evidently didn't recognize a big ball of fire coming through the fuselage as something to avoid. And I'm telling you this much, if they were on a journey as opposed to just, getting where they needed to go, they would have recognized a big ball of fire as something to avoid. They wouldn't have had to be screamed at by me to leave stuff, to leave everything. It's just, and I think it's part of the desensitization process, because when you're really on a journey, when you're on a ship, when you're on a horseback, when you're walking, you have to be aware of your surroundings. You do, and that's what makes it alights your senses. Plane travel, I think, can do the opposite. It promulgates a desensitization of your senses so that you don't really, so that you don't really know where you are, because if you really thought about it, you'd be in a panic, to where you need to be screamed at. Leave everything. Get up, get out. Release your seatbelts. I can say it in German. Fußgelenke umklammern. That means grab your ankles. That's a crash command. You gotta bend down, grab your ankles so that all the debris will fly overboard. They don't want you to think about that, but that's something I couldn't stop thinking about when I was on the plane. I was always so certain it was gonna crash and I was gonna end up dead on the end, in the inside cover of Newsweek with my skirt over my head. I was totally terrified that I was going to be make a mess. I didn't want to make a mess. I didn't want to leave my kidney on a car antenna or anything like that. These are things that are always coming through my mind. Sorry. But I just want to, and I want to leave you with something here too. I just think it's amazing that this crash command is leave everything, leave everything. I want to tell you another story about a fire at the MGM Grand that happened in the 70s. People were found, this hotel fire, I don't know who remembers it here, but I'm sure almost everybody's heard of the famous MGM Hotel Grand fire in Las Vegas. They found people in the elevator bays, just dead from smoke inhalation, still clutching their suitcases because they had gone back to their hotel rooms to pack their possessions before beginning the evacuation of the hotel. And that right there is what was their mistake. So they died that way. There were other people there who knew that they couldn't make it outside. They didn't want to cling to the unforgiving exterior of the hotel. They didn't, they knew they weren't going to make it, so they went back to their hotel rooms and they found these people clinging to each other, dead, still clinging to each other. So this is an example of people that don't know when to let go, and other people that know what is worth hanging on to. And I think that's a lesson, and I wish people would adhere to it. And instead of flying up to a place, why don't you journey there instead? Make the journey the escape. Experience your surroundings. There's a flight attendant. We have defibrillators on the plane now, defibrillators, which are, you know what those things are. When people die, you stick them on there and you go, clear, kunk, and they come back to life. People die on the plane all the time now, and they're always brought back to life, And I remember there was an occasion where somebody, a very old, very sick passenger, collapsed and died in the galley. And a flight attendant revived him with a defibrillator finally, and she was exhausted after that. And I remember when she came home from work that day, she said to me, seriously, she said, I wish dead people would just stay home. And I think, I agree with her. I think dead people should stay home. I think that that's just such a basic. But that plane travel, if there's anything that interferes with that basic knowledge, and plane travel does on some levels. So I think, my point is, and I do have one, is on a general level, not, hopefully if you walk away with anything, experience a journey. Be in contact with who's around you. Don't accept this as the only way to get somewhere, because this is just going to take you somewhere. You're going to close your eyes, and then in one hemisphere, open them in another hemisphere, and you will not have divested any of the things that are unneeded and clung to the things that are. That's what true travel is. You go out and experience, other cultures. I think about terrorists. If a terrorist, for example, started out in one part of the hemisphere and wanted to go do harm to another country in another part of the hemisphere, if that person had to travel along, camelback, horseback, elephant back, train, whatever, experiencing all the cultures along the way, who's to say that that big ball of hate would still be intact by the time he arrived to his destination? I don't think it would. So I guess my message is simple, just leave everything. Just cling to things that are important, let go of things that are, and experience the journey. That's it.